Well, good morning, everybody in the Committed 100. Welcome to Church History with me. Sorry for the late start. I had some technical difficulties. The guys working next door on my new office, which you guys should be able to see this next Friday. No more bathrooms behind me. And by next Friday, this should be moved into the new office. Looking forward to that. Big thanks to all the guys that have been working hard on that. Hopefully the audio is good for you guys. Let me know if it gets too loud or grainy. I'm trying a new setup this morning. But with that, hopefully you have your coffee or tea or Mr. Pibb in the case of Dave. You got your pens, papers, highlighters, Bibles as we take a look at church history, looking at the German pre-Reformation period. Some of the popes that predate Martin Luther, as next week we'll be picking up early Martin Luther in his pre-Reformation days as a monk and Catholic priest. But with that, let's dive right into it. You won't see my face, but you should hear me. See y'all in a second. Alrighty. Here we are back at church history, coming up to the end of the 1400s, early 1500s. Hopefully last week's combination of church history and systematic theology, looking at 1 John 5:7, and the Comma Johanneum was both informative and beneficial for you. But as we start looking at the German pre-Reformation, as I call it, we have to realize what's happening in what's called the Holy Roman Empire, especially with the popes. As we'd already looked, you have the pornocracy for the last about 2 centuries, in which offices within the church are up for the highest bidder. You see popes killing each other. At one point, we've got 3 popes at one time. Then there's somewhat of a reconciliation, and then now by 1500s, you've got the patriarch in the East, the Holy Roman Emperor, who also serves as a religious figure in the West, and then you have the Pope in Rome. We get to the Borgias, which has been redone into a TV show. I wouldn't suggest anybody watch it, but we get to the corruption and the absolute anti-religiousness of the Borgia popes. One of them, going by the name of Rodrigo Borgia, who was, when he became pope, was Alexander VI. Now, there was a previous Borgia pope who wasn't nearly as bad, about almost a century before him. But Rodrigo has kids by many different, either concubines, wives, and or just random ladies. Some of his kids were, shall we say, illegitimate, even while being pope. He was well known for having ladies of the night, shall we say, next to him while he's on St. Peter's throne. Some of his kids include Juan, Caesar, who he makes a cardinal at age 9 or 11, I believe, very young. Joffrey and Lucretia. Lucretia is a very interesting character in history. Lucretia was given in marriage at least 3 separate times, and each time the marriage being annulled for one reason or another by her father. Mainly, I believe, for political reasons, in marrying different rulers and leaders throughout the known world. Rodrigo was able to obtain becoming a cardinal. And look out, Dave's here. Rodrigo was able to obtain both his bishopric and then eventually him being a cardinal and eventually the Pope in and through what's called benefices. In other words, you can have so many certain responsibilities over certain churches, and each of them paid a certain amount of money. And so the practice had become by this time that if you wanted to do something else, you could hire a lesser priest to take over that church or that bishopric, and you could do whatever you want. And so, but in turn, you kept the majority of the money for the benefice and gave the priest or the bishop a small sum out of that. Now, there were a limitation at the time, according to cardinal law, about how many benefices you had. Now, you could buy indulgences or special papers from the Pope to have more than one. We see this with the Archbishop of Mainz here in starting next week, who was alive at the time of Martin Luther. The whole point of raising funds to purchase extra benefices. In fact, the Archbishop of Mainz, to become the Archbishop, had to have more than 2 benefices. According to cardinal law, he could only have 2, and so he had to purchase an additional paper from the Pope, which cost at the time 30,000 ducats, which in modern money is about $1.8 million. Now, he's just an archbishop, and he's got to shell out over $1 million to obtain his archbishopric. Yeah, talk about corrupt, Dave. It's ridiculous. Much less Rodrigo Borgia, who became a cardinal through either purchasing of other people's benefices or flat out bribery. It's abundantly known that he purchased the office as Pope by bribing the other cardinals to vote for him. Now, what's interesting about this is that as we start to see Martin Luther had a benefice, in which allowed him to then become the professor in Wittenberg, because he just had a lesser priest take over that position to allow him to do what he did. Now, at the same time, too, the popes were very famous for using their political power through interdicts. In other words, if a particular priest or area may be under control of a rival leader, the Pope or cardinal could prevent those priests from either giving baptism or communion through something called an interdict until they could come back into communion with the church. Now, this would often be aimed at the individual churches that served political leaders. So, for instance, this happened in England during the time of the Church of England as well, that if you angered the king could tell your local bishop or the local priest of basically doing an interdict. You can't give baptism or communion to anybody in this family until they get right with the king. Same thing's happening here in what's called the Holy Roman Empire. They use interdicts to prevent people from receiving of the sacraments in order to remain saved. And so if they valued eternity at all, they would often be concerned about this and to make amends with either the Pope or the King to get their rights back. What's interesting too is that Rodrigo Borgia, we know 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Shortly after that, Rodrigo becomes Pope. And because of political reasons, he gives rights to Isabella and Ferdinand to become the monarchs of Spain and gives them exclusive right for exploring the New World. Basically gives all of the American Eastern Seaboard, most of the Atlantic, over to to Spain, solely theirs to sail and to explore, removing any potential challengers or competition for especially finding gold and other precious valuables in the New World. Now we come to Pope Julius II, who succeeded Alexander VI. This brings us into the 15th century, into the beginning of the Reformation. Pope Julius II only reigned for 10 years. He starts rebuilding St. Peter's Basilica, making it bigger and grander. He also started the Swiss Guard, which we still see to this day in those funny colored outfits with pole axes and spears. We also see then him being succeeded by Leo X, who, oddly enough, in our discussion about Erasmus and his Novum Testamentum, is that in order to get around and to try and prevent the Pope from denying their printing of his Novum Instrumentum, mainly because of the Latin, not of the Greek. Remember, at this point, for 1,000 years, Jerome's Vulgate had been the king of translations. Even though Pope Sixtus is going to have his infallible translation here pretty soon, in which is going to be immediately removed by the church because of its manifold errors. So Erasmus knows, and his printer, Frobing, know that Cardinal Jimenez is going to be printing his polyglot, 6 volumes. But he's going through the normal routes of paperwork in and through the Vatican to approve it and to get the papal seal. Because at this point, anything that was printed in the religious realm, period, had to be approved by Rome. And so it was a long and expensive process. So Erasmus and his printer wanted to get ahead of the others working on similar projects, but they didn't want to go through all the red tape of the church. So what they did to hedge their bets and to try and stay out of jail was they dedicated Erasmus's Novum Testamentum to Leo X. So for all you Textus Receptus only folks out there, the original Textus Receptus, Erasmus's first edition, was dedicated to the Pope. That should bring a moment of pause towards Textus Receptus only folks, but maybe not, as we talked about last week. Also, Leo X begins granting indulgences to pay for St. Peter's. This is where you get Johann Tetzel and the selling of his indulgences in Saxony, in Germany, in which Martin Luther hears of these things and is going, what in the world? But also, as we talked about the week before last, you have nationalism on the rise. You have people saying, why should money be going to Rome to pay for St. Peter's Basilica when the money in which to buy these indulgences should be going to cathedrals and churches here in Germany? Why does it need to go to Rome? So there, you've got this competition of nationalism versus any type of an allegiance to Rome. At the same time that Leo X is Pope. So here we enter into the German Reformation. We've entered into the 1500s. You have the Holy Roman Emperor, who's both somewhat of a religious figure and a political figure. Once again, the marriage of the church and the state, by this point, 1200 years of a marriage between the church and the state. Now, in Germany, was allowed to do things a little bit differently. They had electors, and each country and province was allowed a certain number of electors. These electors would then, in turn, by this point, elect whoever the next emperor was going to be. These were men of substance. These were men who had money, a great influence, and of the electors, the next Holy Roman Emperor was often from one of the electors from across the empire. But also at the same time, you have the beginnings of princes in certain lands, such as Germany and France and others, who, because of the rise of monarchs, kings and queens, such as happening in Spain and in France and other parts of the world at this point, you have princes that then, even though they're not electors, have great voice and great sway in the electoral process. So then we come to Frederick the Wise. He was a Saxon elector who had much to do with Luther. He starts the University in Wittenberg, 1502. He wants to bring prestige to his county, shall we say. He wants to bring prestige by having a university in which people are able to. This is the Renaissance. This is the Enlightenment. This is the gathering of knowledge together. And so he thinks by doing this that will increase, number one, his popularity among the electors, as well as bring extra funds and people into Saxony. Here's a picture of Wittenberg University today. There's obviously more buildings than this, but this is the original building that we then see in a woodcut drawing from, I believe, this late 1700s, early 1800s, of what the University of Wittenberg looked like then. The University in Wittenberg was never a large university. For its first century or so of existence, it was always a small university. And in order to gain reputation for yourself as a new university, you needed to draw for yourself professors with a name, professors with a reputation. In other words, if I started a new Christian seminary, I would want to get Dr. Howard to come to the seminary to come teach, because his reputation would come with him to then draw and attract new students and money into the university. Same thing is true with Frederick and the University of Wittenberg. He needed to draw professors with names, with reputations, but also that didn't cost a whole lot of money, because this is a startup university. Also, during this time, one of the great ways to draw attention to yourself as a university was to have debates. Not the political type debates that we have today, but was to draw attention by having professors from other universities come to your university and to host a debate on various topics. One of them that was key was religious topics, theology. And so one of the reasons why Frederick would draw Martin Luther is Martin Luther was an able debater. And so they didn't have sports competitions. It wasn't, they didn't have football or baseball or soccer or any other sport to draw attention from the surrounding community. But the surrounding communities would come in when a debate was announced. So in order to draw more people, both students and community and funds, universities such as the one here in Wittenberg would have debates often with other colleges. These debates would be announced very early. There would be many of them throughout the year, and often these would last days. And we're not talking, you search online theological debates nowadays, they're between 1 to 3 hours, versus the debates that University of Wittenberg would put on would be 3 or 4 days, 8 to 10 hours a day. Two combatants would go back and forth discussing whatever topic it was that they were to debate. Also, you have to remember at this time that beginning of this scholastic movement, we see that those students attending seminary would need to be able to debate in the case in Wittenberg, in German, in Latin, and in Greek. You had to be able to debate in 3 languages: German, Latin, and Greek. I mean, it's bad enough that nowadays, you've got to take 4 semesters of Greek for your average MDiv student, and at least 2 semesters of Hebrew. And very few seminaries are requiring Latin. Normally, that's a doctoral level class. But we see kind of a going away from the Renaissance languages to more of the common language, the Koine language. So this is why Martin Luther thrived and did well when he was in Wittenberg. Not only because of his ability to do so and taking up of preaching in the church there, but also in his teaching at the University of Wittenberg. But I actually have homework for you guys this week. It involves getting on the internet and using something called YouTube. Because of the period in which we're going to be in, the beginnings of the Reformation, specifically with Luther, on YouTube, they have BBC's version of Martin Luther Heretic. Generally pretty historically accurate. They do somewhat time condense some of the events in Luther's life that happened many years apart together in the movie. The same thing with the movie Martin Luther in 2004 is available online. It still should be available on YouTube, but sometimes it goes down and comes up. And I believe Ralph Fiennes plays Martin Luther in the movie. Again, generally historically accurate. But these movies, what they will do is give you a big overview of Martin Luther's life and transitions from Roman Catholic priest to champion of the Reformation. So that as we discuss the particulars, then you already have an overview of the time period in which we're going to be looking at. So once again, take a look at Martin Luther Heretic on YouTube, available for free. And I think Martin Luther, the 2004 movie, is on there as well. With that, you guys stay tuned as we'll be getting ready to do Daylight as we discuss whether humanity has been wading in the Tiber River, as I was discussing earlier, between the sacramental system in Rome and the foundations of the Reformation. With that, stay tuned as Dave and Dr. Howard and maybe someone else, maybe even Wyatt, will join us today in our discussion. With that, see you guys in a few. Bye.